obvious reasons of physical security, production had been effected in the States. 2 of the 3 factories were at Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Work had gone on secretly for 2 years at this place under the direction of British and American scientists. When the news of their success burst on the world, the shock was as violent as the bomb itself, and the potentialities even more shattering. Thousands were employed in the factories without knowing what they were making. The inauguration of Teddy Roosevelt as president was the first event of the kind ever shown on the screen. Accompanied by Rough Riders he led in the Spanish-American War, his drive was an exciting event. So was the film of it. That was in 1901, and now a 1903 special.
Advisor, man of secrecy, President and Mrs. Wilson. He represented world idealism and fought for the League of Nations as a guarantee of peace. In the palace of the kings of France, they concluded the Treaty of Versailles, which Woodrow Wilson's own country was to reject.
In New York, Mr. Billy Graham makes a dramatic denunciation.
There's something wrong with human nature. What is it in the nature of men that causes men to lie and hate and cheat and steal and lust and have pride and bigotry and intolerance and racial intolerance? What is it that causes men to have these terrible things down inside of them? You find them in Africa, you find them in South America, you find them in New York, and you find them in Chicago, and you find them in London, all over the world, in every culture, in every race group. You find these tendencies in the human heart. And until we find something to control the human heart, we are never going to solve the problems of the world. And if our intellectual and political leaders believe that our only hope is a religious revival, then you and I as Christians better be about it.
In Washington, a warm greeting between Mr. Truman, now retiring from his high office, and the man who takes over from him, General Eisenhower. From the White House, they make the traditional drive to the Capitol, though the tradition of the top hat has evidently been discarded. All Washington, of course, was there to witness the inauguration of the 34th President of the United States. Then the historic moment. Chief Justice Vinson administers the presidential oath to the famous leader of armies, now to lead the nation.
You, Dwight D. Eisenhower, do solemnly swear. I, Dwight D. Eisenhower, do solemnly swear that you will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States that I will faithfully execute the office of the President of the United States and will, to the best of your ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God.
Now a kiss for his wife, the new First Lady from President Eisenhower. A greeting to the vast audience, an inaugural speech which ended like this.
We must be willing, individually and as a nation, to accept whatever sacrifices may be required of us. A people that values its privileges above its principles soon loses both. This is the work that awaits us all, to be done with bravery, with charity, and with prayer to Almighty God. My citizens, I thank you.
Harry Truman's great and memorable service to his country as president is at an end. And now the spotlight and the cheering are reserved for his successor, who drives off at the head of the triumphal procession. Representatives of all the armed services march past the new president, who reviews them from the White House. At one point, some Red Indians break ranks to pay their personal tribute as the great parade continues, watched by 1 million spectators. The president, with Vice President Nixon, takes the salute from the nation.
New Viceroy, an immediate problem over and above the many difficulties of administration in India today. News from America includes wartime election scenes, with every citizen casting his or her vote for senators, judges, and governors of states. Chief interest for us lies in any pointers they may give regarding next year's presidential and congressional elections. A strong Republican trend seems to indicate that the Democrats will have to steer through rough seas in 1944, but it's much too early to be prophetic. New York's governor, Thomas Dewey, maintains that he will not become a candidate for the presidency. We shall see. Mr. Wendell Willkie, another very famous Republican, casting his vote. And the president, not apparently at all perturbed by democratic setbacks. Throughout the length and breadth of America, citizens crowded to the polling booths to indicate their choice for the next president. General and Mrs. Eisenhower were eligible to vote in New York, too early yet to guess the great landslide for him. In Illinois, Mr. Adlai Stevenson joined the early morning throng to cast his ballot. He'd made a great fight, but now that was over. And President Truman, who sprang such a surprise last time, he looked confident, but presently at Republican headquarters, as the returns came in, spirits were high. The excitement was typified by the scene in Times Square. Victory for Ike and the Republicans. The president-elect, accompanied by his wife, now to become America's First Lady, then spoke of the task ahead.
Now, my friends, it is trite to say that this is a day of dedication rather than of triumph. But I am indeed as humble as I am proud of the decision that the American people have made. And I recognize clearly the weight of the responsibilities you have placed upon me, and I assure you that I shall never, in my service in Washington, give short weight to those responsibilities.
But before work as president, a short holiday. Off he goes to Georgia with his wife, his daughter-in-law, and his grandchildren on a family vacation. America's vice president arrives in Moscow with his wife, and there's a warm welcome for them. I hope everyone I meet will speak freely with me, he said. The irony of that remark is revealed in this enlarged television film during his impromptu exchange with Mr. Khrushchev at the American exhibition.
There are some instances where you may be ahead of us. For example, in the development of the thrust of your rockets for the investigation of outer space.
Mr. Khrushchev agrees, but also claims Russian superiority in other fields, too. Let us compete, he says, which of us can do more for our people.
You must not be afraid of ideas.
This is translated, and Mr. K replies forcefully, "We are telling you not to be afraid of ideas. We have no reason to fear them."
Well, then let's have more exchange of them. We all agree on that, right? Because after all, you don't know everything.
Again, Mr. K rises to the challenge. "You don't know anything about communism." Then he complains, "Your English words will be heard, but what I am saying will only be translated into your ear. Will the American people ever hear it?" Mr. Nixon tried to reassure him.
There isn't a day that goes by in the United States when we can't read everything that you say in the Soviet Union. And I can assure you that never make a statement here that you don't think we read in the United States.
Governor Adlai Stevenson, as a national political figure, is one of the year's most dramatic news developments. To millions of Americans a few short months ago, the future Democratic presidential nominee was virtually unknown. The convention in Chicago decided otherwise. It drafted him as the party's presidential nominee and named Alabama Senator John J. Sparkman to be his running mate, carrying his cause to the people from coast to coast, making his position unmistakable on all vital issues.
Our country was developed in a short time by men who believed, as I believe, that a growing economy will spread the benefits of a rising standard of living more widely. They were bold men, willing to hazard lives and fortunes on the future, who began the process that has now made us great. It is now our duty to show no less courage, to conserve the spirit as well as the substance handed down to us. We must imagine greatly, we must dare greatly, we must act greatly, confident that thus our forward movement cannot be halted. For upon what we
will reduce our naval strength in proportion to any other. And having said that, it remains for the others to say how low they will go. It cannot be too low for us. Now, men of goodwill throughout the world are working earnestly and honestly to perfect the equipment and preparedness for peace. But there is something higher, something above and infinitely more powerful than the work of all ambassadors and ministers, something far more powerful than the treaties and the machinery of arbitration and of conciliation or judicial decision, something more vital than even our covenants to abolish war, something more mighty in defense than armies and navies. That is to build the spirit of goodwill and friendliness, to create respect and confidence, to stimulate esteem amongst peoples. That is far the greatest guarantee of peace.
obviate forever the necessity of such measures of self-protection. Now, Mr. President, we could, if we were to use the same reasoning which the Soviet Union has used, we could bring up as an aggressive act the presence of the Soviet vessel, which was right off the shores of Long Island, right off Montauk Point here, a few weeks ago, and which was deliberately interfering with vessels of the United States Navy. We could do that, but we will not do so. We could, under the same
truth that he spoke to us. This was the man who talked sense to the American people. There was one man who said this is a time for self-examination. This is a time for us to take stock, he said. This is a time to decide where we are and where we're going. This, he said, is a time for... He has fought courageously. He has fought honorably. In 1952, a man who is not the favorite son of any one state. I submit to you the man who is the favorite son of 50 states. And not only of 50 states, but the favorite son of every country in the world in which he is known, of the favorite son in every country in which he is unknown, but in which some spark, even though unexpressed, by way of desire for liberty and freedom, still lives. This favorite son, I submit to you, Adlai Stevenson of Illinois.
Not only this audience in Cleveland, Ohio, but all America now knows Senator Nixon's reply to those accusations.
That I'm not going to allow any future smears or attacks to divert me from the great issues of this campaign. And I want all of the American people to know that, as far as I'm concerned, we've just begun to fight.
Mr. Eisenhower, with his wife, fully approved the vice presidential candidate's frank public explanation, and later there was a meeting with the senator and no doubt a discussion on the future plans for the Republican campaign. Meanwhile, this is what Ike had to say.
So far as I am concerned, he is not only completely vindicated, I feel that he acted as a man of courage and of honor, and so far as I am concerned, stands higher than ever before.
As yet, I have not made up my mind.
As the American presidential election approaches its climax, Mr. Adlai Stevenson has been touring the states in the last roundup of Democratic votes. Is he going to win the verdict of the American people? No one can possibly do more than hazard a guess. Mr. Eisenhower, the Republican candidate, has been equally mobile and vocal. Wherever he goes, he draws vast crowds. But is he the man who's going to succeed President Truman? As the pace of the election campaign grows hotter and hotter, the question mark remains.
Speaking from a special train at a naval base on the West Coast, Mr. Roosevelt accepted the nomination for a 4th term.
I have already indicated to you why I accept the nomination which you have offered me. in spite of my desire to retire to the quiet of private life. You in this convention are aware of what I have sought to gain for the nation, and you have asked me to continue. What is the job before us in 1944? First, to win the war, to win it fast, to win it overwhelmingly. Secondly, to form worldwide international organizations and to arrange to use the armed forces of the sovereign nations of the world to make another world war impossible within the foreseeable future.
And with Henry Wallace, Vice President. Next, the scene in Times Square, New York. After one of the most exciting election campaigns in American history, the jubilation of Roosevelt's hair. No blackout here, you'll notice. Mr. Wilkie proved a good loser and said,
"People of America, I accept the result of the election with complete goodwill. I know that they will continue to work, as I shall, for the unity of our people, in the building of a national defense, in aid to Britain."
Firmly in his hand, arrived at the little Pennsylvanian town of Hershey with his wife. 25,000 were there to greet him, for the occasion was a huge party to mark Ike's 63rd birthday. A birthday implies a birthday cake, candles on a cake must be lit, and he knows a thing or two about that. Altogether a pleasant little interlude for the President, a break from world problems and affairs.
It's a hazardous task for ships trying to beat the communist blockade of Quemoy, but it's a vital task if the nationalist garrison manning the offshore islands is to hold out. Supplies are reported to be very short. Batteries on Red China's mainland have almost sealed off the island from help. When supplies do arrive, it's often with this result: a direct hit on a supply ship at the end of a long voyage.